What's happening guys, Chris here again. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing my review finally on the Samyang 85mm 1.4, especially versus the Sony 85mm 1.4 G Master, which I have and I've owned for maybe 2 years now. I've used it as my main wedding lens with my 24mm G Master for quite some time, so I have a really good feel of how it works, its downfalls and all that kind of stuff. So today, however, is all about the Samyang 85 and maybe whether it's worth buying. It's a lot cheaper than the Sony 85. So it's going to be totally up to you at the end of the day. I'll tell you right now that both lenses are fantastic and I have no issue recommending either of them to any of you guys on YouTube. So it's really just going to come down to your budget and what you want to spend your money on. But without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. I've got my iPad here, so I've taken a whole bunch of notes. I've tried to do some really thorough tests. We're going to make it pretty quick, but I'm going to put, as always, all the raw files in a link in the description below. So if you want to download them, don't take my word for it. Download them and have a look for yourself. So first I'm going to start with image quality, and it's pretty obvious that the Sony has a slight edge compared to the Samyang. Depends on the situation you're going to be using it in, but especially in the corners and the outside edges, the Sony is a little bit sharper and just resolves a little bit more detail in those areas. At 1.4 in the middle and most of the middle frame, everything is sharp with both lenses, with again the Sony having a slight edge, but it's minimal and both lenses perform really well. One thing I noted was the Sony is a little bit wider, or maybe the Samyang is a little bit tighter. Either way, they're both not exactly 85mm. I'm not sure which one is which. Maybe there's some documentation online about it, but I have a feeling the Samyang is more like about 87, 88mm in terms of focal length. The other thing I noticed when going through the images is the Samyang has a much more warmer appearance to the images. So it's about 1000K on the white balance slider in Lightroom. So it's quite noticeable. It's not really an issue because it's really easy to fix in Lightroom, but if you're pairing it with, say, a 24mm G Master, the temperature in the images are going to be really different, and it's probably not so much of an issue if you're using auto white balance. But if you want to sync a whole bunch of images later, like a wedding for example, you won't be able to sync the temperature because they're so different. The Sony does render the background a little bit smoother because it has the 11 aperture blades like all of the other G Master lenses. Most lenses these days only have 9, and the Samyang is the same, it has 9 aperture blades. So all that means is you're getting that kind of egg clamshell shape to the bokeh balls in the background, where the Sony is a little bit more rounded. Both lenses suffer from chromatic aberration, not majorly, they're not really bad, but the G Master is definitely worse than the Samyang, which surprised me a little bit. The Samyang is really well controlled with chromatic aberration, and if you stop them both down to about 2.8, after that you can't really see it as in these images here. But yeah, the Samyang is definitely better controlled when it comes to chromatic aberration. And finally, the Samyang has a little bit stronger vignette to it wide open. They both vignette pretty heavily at 1.4, but the Samyang is a little bit stronger. Now in terms of focus, I actually already have used this lens, so Samyang sent it to me before it was released and I had a good play with it. But unfortunately at that time I didn't really have enough time to sort of really go in depth and give you guys a review, so I just put it on hold until today's video. So that was quite some time ago. But I've used this new lens for quite a while that has the latest firmware on it, and the focus is really impressive. It focuses pretty much as good as a native lens, but in terms of focus in general, it's really actually quite good. It's a very fraction slower than the G Master, which also surprised me because the G Master is not the fastest lens in the world. I did give it a go last night in low light situations, just focusing around my house, and they both seem to perform pretty much as good as the other. The only thing I noticed was the Samyang, if it lost focus, it would hunt a little bit longer than the Sony would. But in terms of low light focusing and focusing in general, they both work really well. Same story with video focus, although both lenses do make a little bit of noise, which will easily be picked up in the internal recording, as you can see here. They both make similar noises, but the Samyang is a little bit higher pitched and will probably be a little bit more difficult to hide. But if you're using an external mic, it may still be picked up with like a shotgun, but it's not going to be as bad as the internal microphone, obviously. In terms of video focus performance themselves, they both work really well. And in terms of Samyang lenses, it definitely performs better than all the other ones I've tried. So I've tried the 35, the 50 1.4 and the 85 1.4. I've also had a little go with the smaller ones, and this one definitely focuses really well out of all of them. The Sony does focus a little bit closer with its minimum focus distance at about 85 centimeters, whereas the Samyang's at 90 centimeters. So neither one is really that impressive, but the Sony does get a little bit closer. Now onto build quality. They're both about the same size, but the Sony is definitely heavier. It's not really noticeable if you're holding them both together at the same time, but you can tell the Sony is a little bit heavier. In terms of bulk, they're pretty much the same. I believe the Samyang is just very slightly smaller, but when it's on the camera and you're holding it, you can't really tell the difference. The Sony is quite clearly built better than the Samyang lens, but that's to be expected. With the drop in price that you're paying for the Samyang, they have to sacrifice in somewhere. And it seems like they've prioritized the optical quality and just sacrificed a little bit on the build quality. Now that's not to say it's a badly built lens, because it does feel like it's decent quality. It does have a weather sealing gasket on the back of it, which is nice to see. I'm not sure if I've seen that with other Samyang lenses. So it seems like it's decently enough weather sealed, and the build quality is fine for what you're paying. The only thing I'm really not a fan of is with my G Master lens, you have the function button and the AF/MF switch. You also have the aperture control dial, but truth be told, I could do without that. However, I do use the AF/MF switch a lot, especially if I'm shooting hybrid, like photo and video at the same time at a wedding. So it's a little bit frustrating having to go into the menu or programming AF/MF, and my little LED light just died. So the only thing with the Samyang that I'm not a big fan of is it doesn't have the AF/MF switch or the function button or the aperture control dial. It's not really a deal breaker, and a lot of people aren't going to care at all about it, so it's just totally up to you. But the AF/MF switch, I really enjoy having that on the Sony lens. Mostly because if I'm shooting hybrid, like photo and video at the same time at a wedding, I switch to manual focus quite a lot, and I don't want to have to program it to a function button or go into the function menu and change it to manual focus that way. It just takes a little bit longer, and I prefer to have it on a lens, but you know, it's not a deal breaker, just something to note. I did want to just touch on reliability, because I obviously haven't been able to shoot 150 weddings with this lens like I have with my Sony A7III. But however, I did talk to my friend Michael Schultz, who's another wedding photographer, professional full-time wedding photographer in New Zealand, and he has the 85mm Samyang, which he bought when he switched over to Sony last year, and he hasn't had any issues with it whatsoever, and I trust his opinion. So at the end of the day, it's a really fantastic lens. It's a lot cheaper than the Sony G Master, and it focuses really well, which is the main thing for me, and it seems as if it's a reliable product. So if it's something you're after, then I have no issues recommending it. So thanks for watching, guys. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video tomorrow or the day after.